Welcome to Discovering Joy with Roy. I'm Roy, and the title for today's lesson is When Things Go Wrong. It's based on 3 passages of Scripture which you may want to read now, or if you prefer, you can pause this video at any time to check the Scriptures I'm talking about for yourself. They're Acts 23, verses 11 through 35, 2 Corinthians 11, 24 to 33, and chapter 12, verses 8 through 10. A letter I received came to a close with these doleful words. There's little to tell you about me. It's summed up best, I think, by what I've said before. I'm sure the Lord loves some people, but then there are the rest of us. I have and continue to have many problems. I knew her story. She really did have many problems. But so do we all. Does that place us among the rest of us? Do our problems mean the Lord doesn't love us? I don't know anybody who had more problems than the Apostle Paul. Reading about him in Acts chapter 23, the plot against his life in Jerusalem, made me realize again how typical of his dangerous life this was. He was always in trouble. Does that mean the Lord didn't love him? Listen to his list of troubles. This is in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I've been in danger from the rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my own countrymen, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false brothers. I've labored and toiled and have gone without sleep. I've known hunger and thirst, and have often gone without food. I've been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my own concern for all the churches. If your test of the Lord's love is whether or not you are free from troubles, you have to conclude that Paul was indeed unloved. Things often, obviously, went wrong for him. A prominent church member told me 7 years after his conversion that he had just experienced the 7 worst years of his life. Everything went wrong. I asked him then whether he regretted his conversion and would like to return to his old life. No way, he exploded. Christ has made all the difference in my life. There you have it. He still has troubles, maybe even more than before, but he wouldn't give up Christ for anything. For him, it has been almost as if when you accept Christ, you invite trouble. That certainly was the case for the Apostle Paul, wasn't it? Well, what about us? What are we to think when things go wrong? Things may seem worse because we've been so comfortable. I've long been concerned about the generations coming up behind me. They're so comfortable. Children take for granted luxuries that my parents' generation couldn't have imagined. I like what Samuel Butler wrote in his novel, The Way of All Flesh. He refers to Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 29. The fathers have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. But Butler concludes that this isn't the problem so much as the fact that children of well-to-do parents suffer because their parents eat too many sweet ones. When parents indulge themselves in every comfort, they don't prepare their children for life's inevitable disappointments. Jesus never promised his followers easy street. Most people in the world know that. Western Christians seem to be the exception. We've imbibed freely of the heresy that equates material prosperity with God's blessings. We like to think that our high standard of living is proof that God is smiling on us. Yet I can hardly think of a better way that God could punish us as a nation than to let us become fat and sluggish in our prosperity. When other great nations before us did that, they met their doom. I'm afraid this heresy, I'm just afraid of it. It's shallow. Its arrogance is mind-boggling. With a flick of a backhand, it wipes out all Christ followers who have failed to materially prosper. Victims of the Great Depression, for example, victims of government mismanagement, victims of economic reversal throughout history and all over the planet. How juvenile we sound to our Christian brothers and sisters elsewhere who are suffering under totalitarian regimes. Here's another thing to consider. When things go wrong, they may help us to hear God. A middle-aged man told me that this has been true in his life. Life had really smiled on him. He was an independent businessman, and he had prospered beyond his youthful dreams. But even as his business grew, and on the outside everything seemed to be perfect, he was inwardly rotting away. Tension racked his home. He grew increasingly dependent on alcohol. He had to go to a rehabilitation center. And that was followed by hospitalization for 2 different physical problems. Then there was his teenage son, who rebelled and got himself into serious trouble doing so. Yet the man has come through all these traumas with a strength of character that has had me cheering for him. He faced up to his alcoholism and his need for God. He now leans on the Lord as if his life depends on it, as of course it does. But his post-conversion struggles were the most difficult he'd ever faced. So I asked him, "Are you sorry you went in for treatment? Are you sorry you gave your heart fully to the Lord?" "Oh, no," he said. "Would you go back?" "Never," he said. And then we talked about the meaning of joy as opposed to happiness. Happiness depends on what happens to us, on things and events over which we have little control. But joy is a deep, abiding, inner sense of peace and well-being. It belongs to those who know they've got it together with God, and they're getting it together with other people. And he said, "Yes, that joy is what I've been experiencing, but I've sure been unhappy." I asked him again, "Would you trade it?" He must have grown tired of my asking. "Of course not," he said, and that ended my probing. Everything was going wrong, but he was hearing God. C.S. Lewis put it so well. He said, "God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world." I also like what the famous missionary Hudson Taylor said. He said, "It doesn't matter how great the pressure is. It only matters where the pressure lies. Whether it comes between you and God, or whether it presses you near and ever nearer to his heart of love." When things go wrong, they help us hear and help other people. My recovering alcoholic friend, as he was talking with me, had difficulty speaking. Tears kept getting in his way. I'd never seen him cry before. I asked him about it. I wanted to reassure him. Many of us Christian men have embarrassed ourselves with our tears. Tears we didn't shed so freely before becoming a Christ follower. My friend had never let anyone, not his wife nor his children, see him cry. But now his defenses are down. He's admitted his sins and his hurts and his need for the Lord. And now, for the first time in his life, he allows himself to feel the pain of others. When he looks into his wife's eyes, he can see the hurt he put there. He can now see the damage he's done to his children. He's reaching out to them in ways he couldn't when he was hiding. So he cries now as he has never cried, because he cares now as he had never cared. I think this is why Paul says, "Who is weak, and I do not feel weak?" Paul identifies with all others whose weaknesses are like his. "Who is led into sin, and I do not inwardly burn?" His own sinfulness makes him one with them in their sin, and he regrets their error as he regrets his own. His only boast is of his weakness. If I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. Only in weakness. Remember that list of his sufferings I read earlier? Had he learned to quit relying on his own strength and virtues, which he didn't have, and relax into the Lord's strength. And only because of his weakness could he sympathize and identify with others. I must become very personal here. I've about decided that if you ask me to explain in a sentence the secret of any success I've achieved as a minister, limited though it has been, the explanation would be something like this. I've discovered myself to be thoroughly average. Average in what I have accomplished, average in what I've experienced, average in what I have suffered, average in my disappointments. You see, I had intended to be above average. Physically, I was not going to let myself become a typical pot-bellied, flabby-muscled, bifocal, bushy-browed, seedy-dressed, snory, sleeping old man. And then I went and did it. And when I married, one thing I knew for certain. I was not going to repeat the mistakes of a lot of husbands I knew. Pardon me if I don't elaborate here. Just let me say, I've made my share. As a parent, my kids, because of their superior upbringing, would be perfect. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm very proud of our children. But they aren't perfect. And frankly, that they turned out well is more in spite of than because of their father's contribution. I blame my wife for a lot of the good in them. As a minister, I was going to be a perfect minister if it killed me. And it nearly did. And my trying wasn't enough. In so many other ways, I was going to be exceptional. I would be an astute manager of our money. Never would I be guilty of investing our money in some flaky scheme. And I'm not going to, ever again. So here's my testimony. My family and I have drawn deeply from what life offers. All that's good and a lot that isn't. Unlike my early correspondent, though, we haven't concluded that things that have gone wrong prove that the Lord doesn't love us. We turned out to be an average family with average parents and average children, and I turned out to be a pretty average minister with average gifts and average problems. This has been my greatest strength. Everything that has gone wrong I've been able to use to help somebody else. In the beginning, I thought a minister had to live a perfect life and be a perfect example. Now I understand that if I had been able to escape the disappointments and heartaches of life, I could not have served my people half so well. I wouldn't have understood. I couldn't have helped. I would not have been able to say, I know. I've been where you are. Well, that's about me. What about you? What's gone wrong in your life? You've obviously been able to stand it, or you wouldn't be here watching this video. You've come through. One more question, though. Have you been able to use your experience for good? Has it helped you help others? Who's benefiting from what you have suffered? You won't benefit from your experiences so long as your life is centered on yourself. But if you let God use what has happened for the good of others, then you can bless others. And you'll discover you get the blessing. This then is the joy of Christian life. We can use what goes wrong to the glory of God and to the development, if you please, of our own souls and to the benefit of those whose lives our life touches. There hasn't been a liability in my life that God hasn't turned into an asset in my ministry. My parents' divorce, our family financial disaster, our own chronic health issues, our marriage tensions, our children's storms and stresses, our son's death. Nothing has remained a negative. God has made all things possible. When things go wrong, they make it possible for Christ's power to rest on us. Here's Paul again. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. What kind of power is this? In the Garden of Gethsemane, it seemed more weakness than power. On the cross, it appeared impotent. In the tomb, you'd have thought the power was dead. What kind of power? It's nothing less than the kind of power that raises the dead, as Jesus came out of the tomb. James Michener, in his novel Chesapeake, astutely observes that a sailing ship, like a human being, moves best when it is slightly athwart the wind, when it has to keep its sails tight and attend its course. I've tried sailing a few times. I know Michener's right. If the wind comes from directly behind the boat, pushing it forward, you can hardly control it. And you're shoved along sloppily, going where the wind wants you to go. You're tempted to relax because you're going somewhere in the direction you want, but before you know it, you have drifted off course. The wind's will prevails. Back to Michener. What is needed, he writes, is a wind slightly opposed to the ship, for then tension can be maintained, and juices can flow and ideas can germinate, for ships, like men, respond to challenge. What kind of wind? A police officer I know was falsely accused of a serious felony. His career was threatened. His reputation was severely damaged. He became deeply depressed. He was angry with his accusers and everybody else, and each day became a torture. Yet it was this experience that brought him back to Christ and a new life. What kind of wind? A couple in their late 30s gave up on their stormy marriage. She filed for divorce. It was the shock, that filing for divorce, that woke her husband from his stupor. They are now remarried, newly committed to Christ, and effectively evangelizing their friends who have seen their transformation. In fact, their minister estimated that in the year of their remarriage, 40% of the new members of his church came because of them. What kind of wind? One family who went through bankruptcy could be found 4 years later helping countless others fight their way to financial recovery through job counseling, encouragement, and example. What kind of wind? A friend of mine went to jail for embezzlement. There he rediscovered himself, his loved ones, and his true relations with the Lord. He later called that incarnation the best year of his life. I'm sorry, I just caught myself saying it. Not incarnation, is incarceration. That's a problem with using big words. Whatever it was, that year in jail was the best year of his life. What kind of wind? A wind slightly opposed, forcing the best from us, causing us in our weakness to call on God's strength. That kind of wind. My correspondent wrote, I'm sure the Lord loves some people. Then there are the rest of us. She was wrong. She doesn't ask, how can I make use of what has gone wrong in my life to help others? Instead, she wallows in her self-pity. That way lies defeat. Remember, we followers of Christ can let the Lord use anything that happens for the good of others. Anything. And when we do, we discover something that we've been looking for all along. We discover joy. I bid you joy.